I've worked in super for 30 years, and for the first time it actually became real.
Planning for retirement shouldn't start at 50. A lot of the fear around not having enough is born from not understanding what options you have and, what one thing can do in complementing with the other thing. So it's about really understanding where the funds can come from.
Hi, and welcome to Super Insider, the podcast that is proudly brought to you by Australian Retirement Trust. My name is Josh Van Gestel, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about real retirement planning, thinking a little bit about those steps that you might want to take when you have a realisation that you need to do something with your super. Now, what's going to be covered today is of a general advice nature only. So you really have to think about whether it's appropriate for you and what steps you should take further action on. I'd also encourage you, if this is a new podcast for you, like and subscribe. We've got a lot of episodes that go into a lot of detail on a lot of wonderful things with some pretty wonderful people as well. So please take that opportunity to view those. Now, speaking of wonderful people, Ruth Weaver, how is that for a segue? Welcome back. How are you?
I'm really good. It's great to be back here. I was just thinking on the way here today, the last time we were in the studio together, you had not long celebrated your 50th birthday.
The big 50, yes.
The big 50.
Yeah.
And, I got thinking about that. We often talk about 50 being a really light bulb moment for many of our members when it comes to super. I think it's the time where you think, retirement may be on the horizon and people may engage with super for the first time.
It's actually funny that you say it because I didn't expect it to be a light bulb. I really didn't, especially when I've worked in super for 30 years. And I thought the last person who was going to get to 50 and wake up and go, maybe I'll check in on my super balance. I didn't think it'd be me, but it was. It was actually quite interesting what it brought out.
So when you checked in on your super balance, I'm sure someone who works in super is doing this on a regular basis, but what was different about looking at it at 50 versus at 45 or 46?
In my young 40s, as you are. I think the light bulb for me was that it actually became real. For the first time, instead of talking about everyone else's super, I was actually looking at my own, if that makes sense. It was a really weird moment. But for me, it was actually a really empowering moment. I had two realisations, and that was firstly that a lot of the work I'd done for many years with contributing small amounts, I've only made 2 or 3 major investment changes to my super in all that time, in the last 30 years. I did see the benefits of those and my balance was pretty healthy. That was the first realisation. Probably the second realisation I had was to look at my balance and go, well, reasonably, I'm probably 15 years out from retirement now, so I can probably expect my balance to go up another third or maybe get close to doubling if I continue some of those good behaviours. So I think for me it was both a reflection of what all the hard work I've done, what that's achieved, but also a reflection of how much I've still got ahead of me and how much my super can still grow. But can I maybe flip it? Your last milestone birthday was more than a year ago, but you're still in your young 40s. Can I ask, have you ever jumped onto the forecaster for your own interest? And what's your realisation, or how do you look at it?
I have jumped onto the forecaster and I've been doing it for a very long time. Planning for retirement and thinking about retirement planning shouldn't start at 50. That's something we should be doing the whole way through. So I've always been using retirement forecasters just to get a bit of a taste as to how on track or off track I am, if you like. I guess for me, it's probably slightly different. As a female in Australia, we generally do have less balances than our male counterparts. And that certainly would have been the case for me. I have 3 children and I worked part-time for many years and I took maternity leaves. So I was acutely aware that I may be a victim here of those decisions, if you like. I call it the super baby debt. So I was using the forecasters to really keep a check on whether or not what I wanted to do at retirement was still going to be realistic. And the reason I think it's important to be always planning for retirement, no matter how far away it is the earlier you start doing this, if you are noticing a gap or a bridge, the things you need to do to fix that are so subtle and small when you're in your 30s and 40s compared to waiting till your 50s and 60s.
And that's really interesting because I think in the last episode you and I did together, we talked about super buddies, but we also talked about superannuation probably in your social circle, and that it's not really talked about. When I had my 50th, and I had a lot of friends turn 50 around the same time, so I'm spending time with a lot of them, I did have that realisation that some of them haven't taken those small steps that are going to benefit and that have done so much for me. If we take off our personal hats for a moment and put on our super education hats, the reality is that when we're out talking to members and running education, a lot of them are coming to us in their early 60s or even at a point where they're wanting to make that decision to retire and maybe a bit concerned. What is it that we should be giving them comfort in or that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, look, if you're in your 60s or you're only a couple of years away from retirement and you genuinely feel concerned or you feel like you're not on track and you don't have enough, it's never too late to pick up the phone, have a conversation with us. There are still different ways to look at this. The first is, have you factored in the age pension?
Yep.
Have you considered what that will do? Because for many Australians, the age pension will do a lot of the heavy lifting to fund your retirement.
And that's maybe where we talk a lot about your superannuation more than gives you a freedom above the age pension as opposed to being the bulk of where maybe your retirement savings is coming from.
Yeah, and I often say the age pension very often is designed to meet your needs in retirement. And then if you've got a little bit of super to top it up, that gives you that little bit of breathing space. But this super doesn't have to do all the work in most cases. So really have a think about what role age pension will play. We're also seeing it's less and less common now for people to go from full-time work to full-time retirement.
And we often see people moving in and out of that potentially
That's right.
a couple
I think
of
there's
times.
people are retiring a couple of times now and maybe even transitioning into retirement, cutting back your working hours or, you know, contracting out for a little while when after you've had a little break, going back and doing some part-time work. That's becoming more and more common as well. So there are lots of different types of conversations that we can have with you if you are close to retirement and worried. There are other ways to think about it.
And maybe the other element of it that we've touched on in both of our cases, but thinking about a person there, we talked about levers. The investments lever, though, is probably one they have to think about slightly differently. If someone was coming to you in those circumstances in their 60s, what would your reaction be if they said, well, should I really go in hard on the investments lever? Should I be thinking about, you know, the exposure to growth assets? How would you actually have that discussion with them, or what would you give for thought?
This is a really tricky one because at the end of the day, when you are at retirement, you're more likely to be taking the money out of the system, so you do not have the same time frame to recover from volatility. I would channel my inner Brian Parker and ask them, would they sleep well at night if they woke up and they had lost a portion of that money because of share market movements? If the answer to that is no, well then you've got to reassess how it's invested. You know, you want to be able to, during retirement, have that money still working for you. And that's often another thing people forget. They think that the balance is the balance and it's just going to run out. Remember, it's still invested and earning returns for you right throughout retirement. So we want to strike a balance here between letting you go to bed at night and have a good night's sleep, but also making sure that the superannuation or the income stream, whatever way you structure it, is still working for you.
And so I guess in conclusion of that, it's really that no age is too late to do something.
Absolutely not.
It's just the decisions and the opportunities, even thinking about downsizer with your family home, which comes much later in life. these are opportunities that always will be there, but there's just different levers or different ways you can use them.
A lot of the fear around not having enough is born from not understanding what options you have and, what one thing can do in complementing with the other thing. So it's about really understanding where the funds can come from and what this bit of super that you might have, even if it is only a small amount, what role that can play for you. So I think when you're thinking about retirement, there's some key questions you need to be able to answer. One of them is, what do you want the super to do? Is there going to be other sources of income, or is superannuation going to be your main source of income? Okay, if it is, maybe we do need to look at it a bit more closely. The other one is, what age do you think you might retire at? Because if you're in an industry or working in a job that you absolutely love, like you and I, you might be inclined to work a little bit longer.
So I shouldn't admit now that I was going,
15
can I
years,
nudge
yes,
60? No.
Look, it depends as well whether you're in physical labour or you're in a role. What age are you likely going to want to and physically be able to work until? Because the longer your retirement is, the more money you're going to need. And I know they sound obvious things, but unless you actually go through those little things, you really don't know if you need to be having a panic moment. The other thing people never seem to do very early on is talk to their partners and spouses about joint retirement thinking. So you and I will have met many, many people over the years where a couple will have a very different impression on what retirement might look like. And one is wanting to travel internationally around the world, and the other one
wants to sit at home.
Wants to sit at home and maybe have a caravan and stay local. But you do need to have that conversation, because you might be panicking unnecessarily, or you might have your head in the sand a bit. So.
And that head in the sand, I did a podcast episode recently with Amphooks where we talked about people seeing this headline of I need $1 million and shoving their head in the sand. Let's say that your super isn't in the position that you want, okay? You go through the forecaster starts to give you the ability to think about the income you may need, the income you may get, where your balance is aiming. Where are those levers? You can no longer do small steps that'll make big change for you into the future. You're now having to do bigger steps. What are those bigger steps you're having to take in your planning for retirement?
When I'm using the forecaster and I'm sort of playing with those levers, the three main ones I tend to play with are, number one, the income level I want to draw out of super. So if it's not giving me the result that I like the look of, I'll say, well, I've said I wanted 70,000 a year. What would happen if I dropped that down to 65? And the calculator allows you to do that. So just think about, do I really need 70? Would we be okay with 65? And drop it back, and you'll see the impact that actually has.
And even thinking the calculator lets you put age pension into the mix and to see how that could actually be part of it as well. But that's number one.
That's number one. Number two is, look, it's not ideal, and most of us have a goal in mind around retirement age. But sometimes I'll play with that as well. I'll say, okay, what would it look like if I retired at 60? My husband is actually almost 5 years older than me. He's also in manual labour. So the reality is, if we want to have a couple of years of retirement where we can still, travel, I'm probably going to have to retire a little bit earlier than most, because I don't want him to be, in his late 70s as I'm coming into retirement. I want us to be able to...
Russ may want to go off and enjoy retirement for 5 years
without me. No, of course he wouldn't. No. He would never say that. So I guess it's about that as well. It is, what's a realistic retirement age to model this off? And if you pop in, if I worked 1 year more, that can have a significant impact, because yes, you're getting more super for 1 year, but you're also not taking it out for a whole extra year. So there are two things: change the income, change the retirement age. And then, of course, within the super account itself, there are usually two big strategies or levers, as you said. One is, how is that super invested? Can I change that? And I'll come to that in a second. And the other one is, can I afford to put some money in here? And if so, how? So I'll talk to the contributions very quickly, but the contributions is probably the beginning, if you like. This is getting the money into the system. And I mentioned that when I was a bit younger, when I had my children, I did make small contributions to try and compensate some of the money that wasn't coming in from the employer. But there are different ways to get money into the system, so you need to make sure that you're taking advantage of it. Right now, I work full time, and the way I get money in myself is through salary sacrifice, right? And that's because it's tax effective for me.
Yep.
But when I was at home with small kids, I wasn't salary sacrificing. I was putting money in after tax and taking advantage of incentives the government had.
So the co-contribution.
The co-contribution. So it's important that you're using calculators that are also out there. We've got a lovely one on our website, the contributions calculator. And that will actually guide you as to which method of contributions is likely to give you the better result at the end of the day. So yes, getting money in, but secondly, how? So I play around with that and what would happen if I did more or less and see the impact that has over the longer term.
And I even think, like, dare I say now as a 50-year-old, and I know you as a mum with the 3 girls, that I do start thinking even about the contributions that our kids will be making and what will work best for them. Those small steps that hopefully they'll benefit from our insight. But you said there was another lever.
The other lever is investing. Yep. So investing is something that's very personal to everyone, but I think, and I'll put this to you, how are you looking at investing as a 50-year-old compared to how you looked at it as a 30-year-old, for example?
It's really strange. Again, I said that I've maybe made 2 or 3 big investment changes in the last 30 years. And I went in very strong on growth assets very early on. And what I've done over the last 30 years is not de-risk that, but just made subtle changes with it. It was only when I turned 50 that I did look at my investments and go, am I comfortable with that? And it was the first time I've really ever had that conversation with myself. Now, I didn't make an investment change. I've decided just to leave as it is for the moment. But I now know that is going to be something that I think about. Do I actually want to de-risk that or put in a bit more of a conservative mix just in case something happens in the next 10 years or so?
Maybe just for the purpose of our listeners, explain why someone as they're getting older might be inclined to find themselves more attracted to conservative types of investing.
So even when I listen to Brian Parker, our chief economist, talk about long-term investing and talking about volatility and things that he sees in markets at the moment, and that's where I go, well, if something happens on the market, if we see a major shift in share markets, for example, and there's a big downturn, how comfortable am I with that? And I think 10 years ago, when I was in my early 40s, I would have been very comfortable. But now I'm going, well, if I've got that exposure, the market goes down, my super balance will go down potentially. How will I react to that? And it's the first time, as I said, I didn't make a change, but I thought about it.
Yeah.
And so I think that thought will come back. But the other thing, though, you talked about the tools and calculators. We also have on our website a great tool around investing and trying to understand your investor profile. And again, I hopped onto that retirement forecaster when I turned 50. I also jumped into the investor profile just to almost give myself a bit of comfort that, Josh, you're still where
I am who I think I am.
But the other thing that it caused me to do was actually check in with my advisor. I took the opportunity just to have another chat. I also took the opportunity to look at my insurance. Yeah. I actually felt that my insurance was much greater than I needed it, and I haven't actually reviewed it for some years. So the reason why that's important, it's the first time I've actually decreased my insurance, which as a result is also going to decrease the insurance premium. So it wasn't just the investments and the contributions I thought about. It was also thinking about, well, my financial protection, how has that shifted? My debt isn't quite where it was 10 years ago. Instead of a newborn baby, I've now got an 11-year-old son. So really started to change what I also had insurance for as well, which I think is important when we're in our 50s and approaching retirement to also consider that many of us almost end up 65 going, do I still need this thing?
I think it's interesting when you talked about the risk profile questionnaire and just getting a bit of clarity. Am I invested in an option that matches how I feel? That's what the risk profile is designed for. So it's a couple of questions that you read through and answer, and the end result will say you are this type of investor, so this option might suit you. I also did that, and what was really interesting is I got my husband Russ to do it as well, Russell, and we were very different investors, and I kind of knew that would be the case. So I think for me, I came out as an aggressive investor, and that's probably a reflection.
Which reflects how you are in the office.
Aggressive in life. But an aggressive investor, but I have the insights as to how markets move, and I understand at my age I still have plenty of years to recover any downfalls. Russell is very different, and I think a lot of his fear and why he came out as such a conservative investor was actually more around a lack of knowledge around how investments work, and there was a fear that comes with that. So I do think it's important when you're planning for retirement that you are understanding how this money is invested, the power that investment returns will have on getting you there, but understanding as well how that translates to your own innate personality, because we are all different.
And even how I said to you, I had that awareness that my super balance now will increase by another third, or even could increase by half, depending on markets and other things that I'm doing. But there is a risk to that. I need to understand that I'm signing up for exposure to growth assets to achieve that. So it is really important that I think we also, it's not a set and forget. We know that these things can change as we age. Before we wind up though, can I ask you, we've talked about some of the tools, the calculators. What if I go through that process and, okay, there's things I might decide to do. I might decide to make an investment change, or might decide to make an additional contribution, or I go through that process. What though if I want to actually have a serious discussion or find out what I should be thinking about in terms of how much income I need or what I may want? What's the next step in my journey?
Look, I think the first step is to actually think about what you want, because so many people will go and see a financial advisor, or they'll call us and they'll say, I'm worried about my super, I'm not on track, what can I do? And one of the first things we're going to try and identify is, well, what are you trying to do? What is the role that the super is trying to play? And have you talked to your partner or spouse, if you have one? Are you actually reading from the same hymn sheet here? Or are you trying to achieve very different things? So number one is really think about what you're wanting to do, so that if you are talking to a financial planner or your super fund, you know what it is that you're trying to achieve. So then they're able to help you better when they know that. Number two is actually talking to the experts. There are plenty of us out there that work in the superannuation industry. There are financial planners now that work at super funds, but there's also financial planners that can look at super as just one part of your overall wealth and your accumulation. So, you know, financial planning is such an important part. Retirement, you're retired for as long as you're working. And we put so much effort in preparing ourselves to enter the workforce, and very often then we cram it in to try and prepare and plan for retirement.
Well, let me do two shameless plugs then to maybe finish off. The first is watch our podcast. We've got some incredible episodes that talk just about everything we've discussed. So I think the other thing is, though, we have an incredible education program. Now I'm being very self-promoting. We've got a wonderful education program that is actually designed, to your earlier point, to have you answer some of those questions, those obvious questions, before you even engage with an advisor. And we actually say our education, we want you to walk out with even more questions, because it means that you're starting to dig into it. So I would welcome everyone to come along and see us on stage or online.
And people need to remember, retirement planning is not for people who are almost there. The purpose of planning is to give yourself plenty of time to do it, and we should be starting it a lot earlier than we are.
When I turned 50, I did two things: joined a gym and looked at my super balance. And it was wonderful to go those planning steps that I took 10, 15, 20 years ago, I'm now seeing the benefit of those. So certainly encourage that from the youngest possible age. I think we've probably got the best knowledge superannuation kids in the country.
Yes. Mine can probably do a podcast with you today. They listen to me every day when I'm on the phone or on meetings listening about super. They've got all the lingo.
Well, Ruth, speaking of lingo, thank you for sharing your beautiful lingo with us. Thank you for being a guest today. And to all of you, thank you for your time. We do hope that it helps give you some discussion, and it also gives you optimism in the steps that you can take and the things you can do to start moving forward.